Outlaw Lawyer.
Welcome back into the Outlaw Lawyer. Morgan Patrick, consumer advocate. I'm joined by Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, managing partners at Whitaker and Hamer and practicing attorneys here in North Carolina. Our special guest is Taylor Scruggs-Smith, also an attorney at Whitaker and Hamer. We're about to get into divorce and the state of North Carolina. Before I do that, let's do this. There's a phone number you can call if you've got a legal situation you're facing and you need some answers to your questions. 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about, and an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. And as always, you can always email the program, questions@theoutlawlawyer.com. We'll use them on future programs, and we're going to get to some of those questions here a little bit later. Guys?
Morgan, one of the things we like to do on the show is we like to engage with our listeners. We get a lot of calls to the hotline. We also have an email address. A lot of people will send us in things. And so our first question today, we really haven't tackled. Me and Joe don't live in the family law, domestic law world from day to day. Taylor does, and that's one of the reasons Taylor's visiting us with us today, so we can handle some of these family law listener questions that have been building up here. So the first one, and again, I kind of take a couple of questions and put them together and kind of formulate one that we can talk about on air. But the first one's pretty basic, and we get it a lot. Basically, our listener here says, I want a divorce. What are the bare bones requirements that I have to meet to get a divorce in North Carolina? So here, our listener is married, has been married, has made that painful decision that it's just time to get a divorce. That's what I want to do. And that's a call we get a lot at the firm. And so, Taylor, when you sit down with someone who has kind of made that decision, we'll say our listener here is married, living with their spouse. We're going to give them some kids.
Give them 3 kids.
3 kids.
Yep. 2 boys, a girl.
They live together. They're in the same house. The house, it's titled to both of them. And so we're just going to try to make this the most normal, average divorce situation that we see. So when this listener comes in and says, you know what, can't do it anymore, we'll just make it a super nice situation. It's a mutual decision. They both have decided, right, hey, this ain't working out. What can we do is best for the kids? So we got that person coming in. What's their first step once they've made that decision?
First step is a step that nobody likes. You actually have to separate.
Yeah.
North Carolina is very particular about that. The statute says that you have to remain separate and apart for a continuous year. So you can't even file for a divorce until you've been separated for a year. And separated does not mean living in the same house and just staying on separate sides of the house. We get a lot of calls about that too. Can't do that. You guys have to actually be living in separate households, paying bills separately, getting mail at separate places, truly saying that you're not together anymore.
This is a good time to remind everybody that we're all licensed to practice in North Carolina. And so When we talk about these things, we're talking about North Carolina law. In my mind, our listener is a North Carolina citizen subject to the laws of North Carolina. And so North Carolina, there's no quickie divorce. So obviously this is a big emotional decision that you have to come to, but it's also going to be a financial decision, a lifestyle decision. A lot is going to have to change. And
the big thing is, too, North Carolina is a no-fault-based divorce. So that's the other reason you have to wait for that whole year, because the only grounds to get divorced is that term of separation. So you can't say, oh, he cheated or somebody else cheated and I want a divorce.
Yeah.
You still have to wait.
And that's not to say, and this gets into a more complicated area of discussion, but that's not to say that fault is irrelevant.
Right. It's never irrelevant.
Divorce.
But
you're just saying fault is irrelevant insofar as the question of can I get divorced?
Right. Obviously anything that happened during the marriage can come up in terms of other areas, but whether or not you can actually go to the court and say, divorce me, the fault doesn't matter.
Right. So I think that's the biggest hurdle for people, and I always just thought, I don't know this to be true, but I always just assumed that was part of the statute to discourage divorce or to make people think it over. I don't know that to be the case, but in my mind, that's kind of always how I
think it is to discourage marriage, but I think it's also to spend that year to handle all issues, to encourage mutual agreement to figure out these issues without court time.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Because a lot of people sometimes don't even really know whether or not they want to stay separated, And part of the statute says you have to separate with the intent that it's permanent.
Right.
So if you guys 3 months from after you separate start going to marriage counseling, tell everybody you're married again, and then you move back into the home, you guys start that whole year over again.
You're resetting that clock.
You're resetting that clock. So I think North Carolina appreciates the sanctity and the sense of marriage, and they really want people to really think things through. And if you're going to fully go through with it, go ahead and start figuring out some of these long-term issues like child custody and the money, and not have to make it so contentious in a courtroom.
Yeah, I think the statute and then just general practice of how it plays out, the state really encourages that amicable mutual resolution any way possible, because again, it uses resources. The contentious process, it's not good for anybody. So
Especially for kids.
especially for kids.
And we'll talk more about that. We got another listener question coming up here in a minute we'll talk more about some of those items. But for now, basically, you have to be separated, permanently separated for at least a year, living in different places. And of course, a lot of households, that's a financial.
That's a real financial
Right.
consideration.
A lot of times if you're in a divorce situation, a lot of the ones that we see, there's some financial distress usually in there. Maybe one spouse is not good with money. There's usually financial concerns that have led up to this decision. And on top of that, now you're going to have to find a way to kind of have two households.
Right.
Right.
And if kids are involved, like you said, until something's written down and agreed upon, you got to figure a way to transport the kids back and forth to make sure everybody's seeing the kids. So there's a lot of things that go into it. And I would like to add in that what we actually tell people, even though the statute says a year, we like to tell people when they're in doing consults, it's a year and a day, because you can't file on day 365.
Right.
You got to file on day 366.
I got you. That makes sense.
That one day, crucial.
That one day is so crucial. A judge will knock out the entire case if it's too close.
And then there's things in the. Well, I guess we got another listener question I keep hinting to, but we've got another one coming up, so we'll talk about that there. So you've done it. You've separated from your spouse. You guys have worked out the issues you need to work out during the separation period, and you're at day 366. And who files?
Either party.
Either party can
So
file.
it doesn't matter who files. The main requirement is that at least one party has to still be in North Carolina. So done a divorce before where husband was actually the one filing, but he lived in Georgia, wife still lived here. So as long as one party is still in North Carolina, you can file.
Right.
And it's like a complaint, some basic documents to get started off. One thing that trips a lot of people up, though, is this thing called service, because you have to actually send all the documents that you filed to the other party.
Right.
And right now, with how COVID has messed up the Postal Service,
Right.
we have to do that by certified mail or sheriff. And post office, certified mail is the green card that they have you sign.
Right.
During COVID, they weren't having everybody sign because they weren't letting their carriers go up to the actual people, because they could have been sick or anything like that. So what we did to kind of help combat that, in a sense, was just start putting in with our documents to them an acceptance of service, because that's the one thing your spouse will have to sign. We have to in some way prove they got the docs.
Right.
They don't have to do anything else, but we do have to prove that they received the documents.
Oh, well, and then divorce, it makes sense. Divorce is a legal proceeding. It's a complaint. You're suing somebody. I mean, it's a formal complaint process, and the person on the other end always has to have notice.
Right.
There's different kinds of notice, constructive notice, implied. There's all kinds, but they have to hear actual notice. We need to know that they received it and they know they're aware of what's going on.
Right. It doesn't matter if they don't reply to anything else after that. They either have to have signed a green card, sheriff have to have posted it to their door, or they voluntarily signed an acceptance of service.
All right. So you filed it. Your spouse has gotten notice, and so then I take it there's a scheduled day in court after that.
Yeah. So you do have to wait the 30 days. Your spouse has 30 days with which to reply. They don't have to reply, but we have to wait that 30 days. Courts are very particular about these timelines. You do have to wait these full 30 days. And then after that 30 days is when we can file for a court date to get it moving.
Right.
Typically about 2-3 weeks out from the date you request it.
And then that's it. So you show up to your hearing. Let's assume everything else. We're not talking about property, splitting up property.
Right.
We're not talking about anything else, just the act of getting divorced from a spouse. So then you show up for your day in court. As long as everything else is handled, judge is going to give you an order.
Judge is going to sign an order. Main thing judge is looking for the file for is they want to know the date of separation, the date you signed the complaint. They're checking for that year.
Right.
They're checking for, was it day 366 or day 365?
Right.
And they're checking to make sure service is actually in there. As long as those things are in there and everything was done properly, sign off on the divorce decree, you're divorced.
Done.
Yeah,
deal.
the fact that there's no fault involved, it's really just a procedural question.
Yes.
Like you dot the I's and cross the T's right, and you're getting divorced.
Yeah, if you take property, child custody, if you take all that stuff out of it and you just look at it as two people getting divorced from one another, it's not an overly,
Super simple.
Right.
I think it's safe to say it's
legally.
super simple. Yeah.
Legally.
But I think it's also important that we mention, this fact pattern is a super simple fact pattern. We're taking all those things out of the equation, but those things are super relevant. And, the act of absolute divorce is going to terminate a lot of rights that you would otherwise have. So again, I think we'll get into this in our next question, but those are all considerations. Like you need to be careful if you're an unrepresented party just going down filing simply for divorce, because once that's done, you're going to lose a lot of rights you would have otherwise.
And
Right.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's especially true, because the procedure in North Carolina is like once the judge signs off on that divorce decree, once the judge's ink is on there, you cannot go back to the court and try to say, oh, now I want alimony. Oh, now I want half
you're
of the
divorced.
house.
That's it.
It's it.
Yeah.
It's over. That's the cutoff.
Right.
So if you didn't have those matters already pending, or you didn't have some type of separation agreement, or you didn't have something
Right.
previous to that, you're done. You have no more rights to that house, that retirement account.
This is, yeah, and it's definitely, this is, we talk about some things quickly, right? We have our little segments we like to stick to, and so we try to just hit on some highlights. Obviously, we're not consulting anybody right now. We're just trying to paint a general picture of the process. And yeah, hopefully we haven't made it sound too simple, because
Right.
there is a million things that could go wrong that need to be handled before a certain point. But legally speaking, that's the process. Separated for a year, file for divorce, get your spouse served, show up in court, you're divorced.
Yes.
Sounds like what you're saying, Josh, is you should consult a licensed attorney
Possibly,
prior to beginning the
possibly
process.
Whitaker and Hamer.
Who knows, man? Well, the name is literally on the front of our
But this is one of those things where even just a consult, if you just schedule a consult with an attorney, you can get a lot of questions. I meet a lot of people who don't want to pay for advice, and I get it. Don't want to have to pay an attorney, don't want to have to pay a CPA, don't want to have to pay an investment advisor, and I get that money's tight for a lot of people. But a consultation with an attorney who knows what they're doing, they can answer every question you have. You don't have to just keep going forward with these things unanswered, with these questions unanswered. You can say, hey, answer a question A, B, C, D, and they're all answered, and you gotta way forward.
I know one thing one of our colleagues says is sometimes it's better to talk to an attorney at least once to save you thousands of dollars in the long run.
Right. I mean, everything you own, care about, love is gonna be tied up in this marriage in theory, right? So anyway, and money's always tight, and but you can't. It's just a lot easier to talk to someone that knows the process, knows what's going on, and can just answer all your questions.
The Outlaw Lawyers, they've been there, they've done that, and talking to a professional as opposed to your friend at work seems like the right way to go. The Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer. Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm is where you can find them. They're the managing partners there. They're also practicing attorneys here in North Carolina. And again, our special guest is Taylor Scruggs-Smith, also an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer. And just a reminder, Whitaker and Hamer offices in Raleigh, Garner, Clayton, Goldsboro, Fuquay-Varina, and Gastonia. And if you've got a legal situation, maybe you're considering divorce, I've got a number for you. 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. And again, leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about. You can also email your questions, and we can talk about those anonymously on future shows. Questions@theoutlawlawyer.com.